Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Friday the 5th of July in London. I'm Stephen Carroll in Bloomberg's European headquarters.
And I'm Caroline Hepke in Westminster, where Labour has won a landslide victory, with Keir Starmer set to be the UK's next Prime Minister.
Rishi Sunak takes responsibility for the devastating loss for his party as voters turn their backs on 14 years of Conservative rule.
Plus, a surge in support. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage becomes an MP for the first time as his right-wing party secures a number of seats in Parliament.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Labour leader Keir Starmer will be the UK's next Prime Minister after a landslide win in the general election. The Conservatives have suffered an historic defeat in an election that has been cast as a referendum on 14 years of Tory rule. With the results still coming in, Labour have secured a majority with more than 380 seats so far. The latest projections suggest that they will end up with more than 400 MPs and a parliamentary majority of 160. Speaking earlier this morning, Keir Starmer declared victory.
We did it! You campaigned for it, you fought for it, you voted for it, and now it has arrived. Change begins now. And it feels good, I have to be honest.
So a jubilant Keir Starmer. The landslide result gives Starmer a clear mandate to deliver on his promises of planning reform, transitioning the UK to green energy and stimulating economic growth. However, it's clear that a large part of the vote is also a rejection of the Conservatives after years of chaos, rather than perhaps a wave of enthusiasm for Labour.
The Conservatives are expected to win the lowest number of MPs in over 100 years, with a record number of cabinet ministers losing their seats. Partygate, Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget and a surge in inflation were all factors in the defeat, with Rishi Sunak, the fifth Conservative Prime Minister during 14 years in power, unable to reverse the party's declining popularity. Conceding defeat at the election count in his own constituency, Sunak said he'd already been in touch with the Labour leader.
The Labour Party has won this general election, and I have called Sir Keir Starmer to congratulate him on his victory. Today, power will change hands in a peaceful and orderly manner, with goodwill on all sides. That is something that should give us all confidence in our country's stability and future. The British people have delivered a sobering verdict tonight. There is much to learn and reflect on, and I take responsibility for the loss.
While Rishi Sunak comfortably won in his constituency, a significant number of ministers have lost their seats. Cabinet members Penny Mordaunt, Grant Shapps, Gillian Keegan and Alex Chalk have all lost their seats, but the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt was able to hold his place in Parliament.
The other major story of the campaign has been the rise of the right-wing Reform UK party. Leader Nigel Farage won the Clacton constituency from the Conservatives, becoming an MP after 7 previous failed attempts. And Farage says the results show a new chapter for his party.
We are going to come second in hundreds of constituencies. How many seats we're going to win, I don't know. But to have done this in such a short space of time says something very fundamental is happening.
Nigel Farage has been a constant fixture on the right of British Parliament and politics over the past 2 decades, and is seen as one of the driving forces behind the UK's decision to leave the EU. His entry to Parliament is likely to cause further rifts inside the Conservatives, with some saying that he should be welcomed into their party.
Well, the general election results point to a seismic shift in UK politics. Bloomberg's UK political correspondent Ellen Milligan says the historic defeat for the Conservatives raises question marks over the party's path ahead.
I'm not sure it could have been worse for the Tories. It's massive names losing their seats. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt just clung onto his seat, but Penny Mordaunt, Grant Shapps, Gillian Keegan, Jacob Rees-Mogg, incredibly senior Tories have lost their seats, really narrowing the field as the Tory party scrambles to search for their future.
That's our UK political correspondent Ellen Milligan speaking there. There have also been gains for other parties, including the Liberal Democrats, who've so far won 58 seats, with results still coming in.
Well, the pound has strengthened slightly against the US dollar, while the FTSE 100 futures also pointing higher as the early results have come in. Winning the confidence of investors will be key to the new government's success, as Chancellor Rachel Reeves will be keen to avoid the mistakes of the Liz Truss era. Bloomberg's managing editor for FX and rates, Rachel Evans, says that investors have been relatively unbothered by the party's promises during the campaign.
Fiscal restraint has very much been kind of the name of the game throughout the election campaign. So the market has really entered the election thinking about a low volatility environment. Anything that comes through from a government that wants to enact bold spending plans is really going to shake things up because volatility has just been so low. So any sort of shock is really going to blow out those volatility measures.
Rachel Evans also says that the relationship with the EU will be a key focus for markets in future to see whether the new government can help reverse the Brexit-related hit to assets.
The economic outlook for Keir Starmer is positive. Inflation is low and interest rates are set to fall. But long-term questions remain over how to boost the UK's growth and productivity. Bloomberg's chief UK economist Dan Hansen says making people feel better off will be difficult.
I think there's going to be a bit of an economic honeymoon period, if you like. What that masks, though, is a more challenging medium-term picture. One of the big issues over the past 5 years has been a lack of increase in living standards in the UK, and that will be the big challenge for the new government, boosting living standards, boosting productivity, and getting the economy growing at a faster, sustained rate.
Dan Hansen from Bloomberg Economics also highlights the difficult situation for the public finances. He estimates the spending plans the new government is inheriting already include a shortfall of £20 billion.
Now, elsewhere in France, the National Rally is expected to fall short of an absolute majority in the second round of parliamentary elections there on Sunday. The latest polls show that the far-right group and its allies are on course to win between 190 and 250 seats, falling short, though, of the 289 needed for a majority. Bloomberg senior editor in Paris, Phil Serafino, says that coordinating rival political groups against Marine Le Pen's party seems to be working.
The left and the centre have decided that the worst possible outcome would be a government led by the National Rally. So they've sort of pulled together and decided to pull candidates out of some of those races. So this tactic is looking pretty effective, and that's why she's not happy about it.
Our senior editor in Paris, Phil Serafino, speaking there. Despite the polling, President of the National Rally, Jordan Bardella, says that he remains very confident, telling a debate on France 2 television that people in the country want change.
In the United States, Joe Biden's 4th of July celebrations were overshadowed by pressure from some Democrats for the president to drop his re-election bid. So far, he's refused to back down, and no prominent Democrats have publicly called for him to do so. Ed Baxter has the latest.
The president himself has done a couple of talk shows talking about the debate.
I had a bad night. And the fact of the matter is that, I screwed up. I made a mistake.
That on the Earl Ingram show on Civic Media. Representative Seth Bolton of Massachusetts has become the third House Democrat to publicly call on the president to step out, saying he has done enormous service to the country, but now is the time for him to let new leaders rise up. So how long will the party take to make the final decision? Well, Charles Myers of Signum Global Advisors says he feels just a few days.
Things are moving a little faster than I expected. I thought they'd have at least 2 or 3. We were telling our clients they'd have 2 or 3 weeks of polling before they would have to make a decision. I thought, this is a personal opinion, I think they've got probably another 5 to 6 days. I think that things are moving much faster against the president.
So far from a settled matter. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Caroline Hepker, good morning. You are live in Westminster this morning on a very important day for British politics. What is your sense of what we're reading this morning when we look at the results of this election?
Look, this Labour win was widely expected, but it's still an amazingly unusual election. There were far more parties really in the running in a lot of constituencies in the UK. The staggering thing is simply the depths of the damning verdict that voters in Britain have delivered for the Conservatives. The utter failure of Rishi Sunak, who, remember, was Chancellor before he was Prime Minister, came in barely 2 years ago as PM with net positive ratings. Everybody essentially saw him as competent. That was the word attached to him, despite handing out billions of pounds in pandemic aid for individuals and businesses. The overall view of the British public of what happened was that it was a failure, that real disposable incomes fell under the Tories over 14 years. Labour's focus now, though, I think is so interesting. It is on delivery and on continued unity of the party. That was the key to Keir Starmer's speech today. The economy in the UK is improving, but actually there are a lot of issues that the UK must grapple with: productivity, economic growth, the green transition. I mean, the list is so long. How does Labour actually deliver that?
Well, let's get more into the scale of what we're looking at. We'll be joined by our UK political editor Alex Wickham in just a moment, but first I want to go to Bloomberg's Ewan Potts, who's been following the results through the night for us. Ewan, it's just after 6 a.m. here in London. Take us through where we are in terms of the numbers.
Stephen, a really fascinating night. Labour on course for a majority of 160 to 170. So far, so expected, but if you dig into the detail, really interesting. Latest projections are for an 11% swing from the Conservatives to Labour. That's a bit less than you might expect, but if you look at the distribution of votes, it is incredibly efficient. People have gone out and found the best way to give the Tories a kicking, and they have done it all over the country. They voted Labour where they need to vote Labour, and they voted Lib Dem where they need to vote Lib Dem. The Lib Dems, incidentally, on course perhaps for their best result in 100 years. They've been winning basically everywhere they can. Interesting to look at the Reform vote. At the beginning of the night, we're expecting them to pick up 14 seats, but the exit poll looking a bit dodgy on that, perhaps 4 or 5 for Reform. They've been piling up loads of votes around the country and lots of decent second places for Reform, which I think will be significant for next time, and many of them against Labour as well. In Scotland, a thumping for the SNP. Not my words, the words of Stephen Flynn, the SNP Westminster leader. They've been losing not just in the central belt to Labour as we expected, but they've been losing right across Scotland. The SNP perhaps on course to end up just in single digits, really ending those years of dominance in Scotland. The Greens having a very good night. We've actually seen them pick up 4 seats so far, with unexpected gains in Herefordshire and in East Anglia as well. More cabinet ministers have lost their seats this election than any other in history. We're told that Liz Truss's result is looking very close as well. And very interesting this as well, 2 prominent Labour frontbenchers have been knocked out. You wouldn't expect that in an election winning year for Labour, including Jonathan Ashworth, of course, on the Treasury team, the shadow Treasury team. He lost his seat to an independent, and in Bristol they were knocked out by the Greens. And Wes Streeting, this is quite something, only won by 528 votes in Ilford North, which is a safe Labour seat, a 20 percentage point drop in his vote. That is against a Muslim independent candidate who came very close to unseating him. So lots of challenges to Labour from the Muslim voters abandoning them. But really a fascinating election, a real splintering of the vote, and more parties in Parliament this time around. And I think more electoral uncertainty as we look ahead.
OK, Ewan, my head's spinning, and I'm sure other people's are this morning as well. Thank you very much for taking us through where we are at 14 minutes past 6 this morning in London.
Well, Stephen, let's also get some more analysis, shall we, from our UK political editor, Alex Wickham, who joins us. Alex, I'm in Westminster. I was just outside. It's pouring with rain. Rishi Sunak called this vote 6 weeks ago in the pouring rain. I mean, I think if he has to bring up a black London umbrella, that's simply, going to give us the whole funereal theme for the Conservatives. UK voters are waking up this morning to a new government. What do you think it means, Keir Starmer, Labour's policies as they've laid them out for Britain?
Keir Starmer is going to say that this is a moment of change for the country when he gives his speech at Downing Street. We think maybe 10 or 11 a.m. it will all be done and dusted, and he'll have been to see the King and done all the formalities, and then he'll give his sort of address to the nation. He's not going to be able to promise everything is going to get better very quickly. He's going to say it will take time, but he'll say work starts today, and they'll get going on house building to unlock economic growth, bring in private investment, green transition, fixing the NHS waiting lists, things like that Labour has said. Relatively modest ambitions for the country that after inheriting such difficult public finances from the Tories. But nonetheless, Labour will be absolutely delighted this morning and ready to get going.
How much of a pivot is it from Starmer to go from leader of the opposition to the leader of a G7 country?
It's an absolutely huge change, and I think talking to even civil servants who will be managing this transition, it's hard to go into government. And Keir Starmer has, in Labour Party, often have this view that, well, the Tories are incompetent and venal and corrupt, and that's why everything's gone wrong. Well, depending on your view, that may be true to an extent, but also there are very serious structural problems with the way the country is run and governed, and various problems with the economy and public services, and those don't just get better just because there's a new government. And that is going to be the big challenge for Keir Starmer. Is he has got a huge mandate in terms of seats to get through the policies that he says will improve the country. In 5 years, can he make enough of a difference to make voters happy?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Conservatives, to be fair, face enormous challenges. I mean, some perhaps self-made. Brexit didn't get much of a mention in this election cycle, but also the pandemic, the war in Ukraine and the spike in energy prices. I mean, how significant a loss do you think this is for the Conservatives?
It is an absolute destruction of the Conservative Party. This will looks like be the worst result for the Conservative Party in history in terms of the number of seats that they're going to end up winning. Worse than the 1906 result was the last worst performance. It is going to cause huge introspection, if not worse than that, and full-blown civil war over the future of the Tory party in terms of where they go next. Reform is one of the other stories of this election. Nigel Farage's party, which is going to pick up, looks like 4 or 5 seats, but beneath that, it is second in huge swathes of seats across the country, second usually to the Labour Party. It has stopped the Conservatives from holding on to many seats that it would have considered safe. And basically, voters who want to protest against the Tories for not fixing immigration, for not, running the country in a sufficiently conservative way, to fix that over the next 5 years is going to be a nightmare for the Tories.
Look, we've talked about some of the big names who've lost their seats already, Penny Mordaunt, Grant Shapps, but I want to take a listen to one of the senior Tory figures who did keep her seat. This is Suella Braverman.
There is only one thing that I can say. Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that my party didn't listen to you. The Conservative Party has let you down. You, the great British people, voted for us over 14 years, and we did not keep our promises. We've acted as if we're entitled to your vote, regardless of what we did, regardless of what we didn't do, despite promising time after time that we would do those things.
That's Suella Braverman speaking after holding her seat in Fareham and Waterlooville. Alex, when we listen to Suella Braverman there, that tone coming through in quite a lot of the speeches, the concession speeches for some that we've heard overnight as well, do we have an idea of what the future of the Tory party looks like?
I think there will be a leadership contest in the next probably couple of months over the summer. Kemi Badenoch, it looks like, is going to be a front runner in that contest. It's interesting because a lot of right-wing Tory MPs have lost their seats. People like Jacob Rees-Mogg in a Portillo-style moment. People like Liz Truss look under big threat. But in terms of the candidates who could be leader, lots of the moderates like Penny Mordaunt and Grant Shapps are gone. And you're left with people like Priti Patel, Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, and, Kemi Badenoch. So Kemi is the front runner, and that is going to be, a very interesting prospect. But, the other question is, how relevant are the Tories? How seriously do we take them in opposition when they only ended up with, looks like maybe 110, 120 seats by the end of this? How much does it really matter? Are they really going to be able to turn it around in the next 5 years?
No, absolutely incredible. I mean, Kemi Badenoch was one of the women in Westminster that we profiled on the Bloomberg UK Politics podcast, as potentially one of the important people to watch. But as you say, how important will those individuals be when they are so reduced? Look, in terms of Labour and the promise of change, I mean, I want to come back to the incoming Labour government. The manifesto was very limited. I mean, they only talked about less than £10 billion in terms of tax and spending plans. Bloomberg Economics thought that it would hardly boost economic growth. I mean, what do you expect them to deliver? What are going to be some of the first milestones?
I think you're going to hear Keir Starmer say probably today, very honestly, just because I've got a huge majority, that doesn't mean I have loads of money all of a sudden. And yes, we might have won big, but that does not change anything in terms of what I can do. So it's all well and good voices in the Labour Party saying you need to be more ambitious, you need to spend more money, you need to tax the rich more, you need to, spend more on public services, fix them all faster. That is easier said than done, and Keir Starmer does not want to do that, and he will not pivot to a more radical approach in certainly the first phase at least of his government. He is betting on stability, private investment and planning reform, essentially unlocking economic growth. Economists are extremely sceptical about that. They sort of call it a growth miracle that he's betting on, and we will have to see in a year or two whether it's working or not, and then he will have to reassess what he does. In terms of the first 100 days, it is things like getting spades in the ground to start, building houses. It is getting GB Energy, this sort of investment vehicle to try and speed up the green transition going. He's got huge crises to deal with on things like prisons, which are essentially full and unable to keep violent criminals inside. He's got big problems in the first 100 days.
OK, Alex Wickham, RUK political editor, thank you very much for joining us with that. Well, let's get more now on some of the big wins of the night. Reform UK, Nigel Farage winning a seat in Clacton on his 8th attempt. Bloomberg's Jack Ryan was there for that moment and he joins us now. Jack, good morning. As I say, Nigel Farage's 8th attempt to win this seat, a big moment for him.
Yeah, well, I suspect this will be among the high points of his political career. As you said, he's run 7 times for Westminster now in the last 30 years. On none of those occasions did he make the mark. Now, finally, the returning officer is calling the name Nigel Farage, and he's set to be entering Parliament for the first time. And for Reform, this is the one they absolutely had to win. It was Nigel Farage crashing into this campaign that preceded their poll jump. They need him in Parliament. He's able to draw attention like no one else in that party. That was on show at the Count Centre. TV cameras and reporters from all around the world were cramming into this centre in Essex. I had to go through airport-style security to get into the place. It reminded me of what the director of politics at Ipsos said earlier this morning, which was that Farage entering the race was probably the most consequential moment of the campaign. And so, yes, big moment for Farage and a big moment for Reform, definitely.
Jack, we have been talking about Nigel Farage having a lot of cut through with voters and the success of the Reform Party elsewhere in the country, even the number of seats being won, but also coming second to Labour in quite a large number of seats as well. Is he going to be a thorn in Keir Starmer's side?
Well, this is certainly what he was hinting at, or not even hinting at, directly saying in his post-victory speech, that now Reform is in second place in a lot of the country and Labour is the next target. They've already defeated the Conservatives and left them in the rearview mirror. I'm not so sure that Labour will see Reform as a major threat. It's true they did come second in a lot of seats to Labour, but it appears as though their main pool of support is 2019 Conservative voters, not Labour. And so really, I think the fundamental threat Reform poses is to the Conservative Party. They will not want to go into the next election with Reform on their right flank pulling 10% or 15% of the vote. So I think probably the discussion about what to do about Farage have already begun, but I reckon they're a bit more frantic in the Tory tent.
Yeah, I think it was very interesting in the taxi on the way over here. The taxi driver was saying, well, Nigel Farage, he shook things up, didn't he? That does seem to be the view, essentially. But it wasn't just Farage. It's also that Richard Tice got in, Lee Anderson, who, of course, went from being the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party over to Reform. So there's a number, they're going to have a number of seats, as you say. I want to touch on the controversies that they've faced. Accusations, for example, of racism against Reform UK campaigners. How controversial are they?
Well, this is something that's dominated headlines for Reform in the final days of the campaign. There was a seemingly endless number of stories of candidates who were revealed to have made extreme racist or homophobic comments online or in person in previous years or even during the campaign. And Reform appear to have shifted their line on this. At first, they dismissed it as a few bad apples, but as that line, I think, became harder to maintain, they moved on to putting it on their relative inexperience and also putting blame on their vetting company, which Farage had said stitched him up. So after the count, he appeared to acknowledge this again. He acknowledged some of the organisational problems the party had, said he wanted to, as he said, throw out the idiots. But I suppose for critics of reform, they would wonder whether this string of comments represents a real strain of sentiment within the party.
OK, Jack Ryan in Clacton, thank you very much for joining us with the rise of Nigel Farage into Parliament for the first time, winning the seat there, one of a number of wins for the Reform UK party this morning. And Caroline, really that's one of the key stories of the election today.
Yeah, absolutely. Reform UK may also have won more votes than seats, but I think they are going to be immensely important. And the other point I'd make is on their election manifesto. You know, it was seen as pretty dubious. The IFS thought that it was questionable because they actually had huge spending and tax plans. They promised, for example, to slash NHS waiting times in 2 years without really the money to back it. So it's also their policies that I think are going to be very important, because they will surely get more of an airing and more attention in this next Parliament.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.